Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Kevin Kelton, and as always, I'm pleased to share the mic with Greg Matusak.
You're a common sense liberal from Cincinnati. I'm just overwhelmed by this week, so I have nothing. No jokes, nothing. It is just straight into it.
Wait,
Pass.
you often tell jokes?
No. Well, I like to think they're witty observations that the common man can get behind. Quips, if you will. I'm the Jerry Seinfeld of the
More Perfect Union.
Of the More Perfect. What's the deal with social unrest? I say stuff like that.
And Rebecca Cushmider's here.
Hi, I am here, and you can pry my organs from my cold, dead hands, Supreme Court. I'm going to be hanging on to those until the last possible second. I am here in Kensington, Maryland, with all of my organs still attached.
And DJ McGuire.
A cat person from Hampton Roads, Virginia, who has never been to South Dakota, so don't blame me.
Well, I wouldn't blame you even if you had been, but let's talk about our new friend Kristi Noam and her strong stance on PETA. That news broke yesterday, and obviously everybody thinks it's abhorrent, but any interesting observations on her decision to down her dog and a goat on the same day?
Well, it's not just that, but she has now doubled down on it, and she has told people these were that's what life on the farm is. You shoot animals, but the more
that's what life on the farm.
That's what life on the farm is, but the more she talks about the story, the more horrific it is, because I know I live in Ohio. Trust me, I did not grow up on a farm, but I grew up farm adjacent. And I knew lots of people. They did not shoot their pets. And I know she called this a hunting dog, but when her daughter said, "Hey, where's the puppy?" I mean, and this thing, and she had to explain to her, it just wasn't working out. It chased some chickens, We had to shoot it, which I guess was a lesson for her daughter not to chase chickens. And the goat was smelly and was annoying. So,
by that metric, that's definitely going to lose her the vice presidential slot. Because if she shoots things that are smelly and annoying,
I don't know. It worked well for Cheney.
The top guy might not want her on his team.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah.
Well, that remains to be seen. But what I find interesting is, I don't think they just write these books in a vacuum. I think that they group test and focus test things like this. And on some level, she thought this was going to make her more attractive politically to their base.
Without a doubt. That's psychotic.
Yes.
Yes. So, speaking of psychotic, the anti-Israel protests are spreading across campuses and getting more heated. And I think it's likely to continue through the two-party conventions this summer and into the fall when universities are set to reopen. And let me tell you, gang, if you think it's easy for them to shut down commencements, wait till universities have to look at the logistics of reopening colleges while protests are going on. So you go into the fall and colleges are not reopening. It's going to be really bad for Joe Biden. It's a really bad look, especially if things get rowdy and violent, and especially if the police or the National Guard have to get sent in to clear them out, which did not work so well for Richard Nixon. So with that in mind, what are Joe's political options?
I would remind everyone here that after 2.5 years after Kent State, Richard Nixon carried 49 out of 50 states and won over 60% of the vote.
This is true.
So now
maybe he should shoot some students.
Let's not do that though. Let's not be radical.
I wouldn't say that. Kevin, I'm going to ask you a question. How many protesters do you think will be at the Democratic convention this summer?
I don't know, maybe 1,000?
50,000?
Okay. Let me take that back. High hundreds.
Oh no, I'm with you. I think thousands.
hang on a second. So you're saying less than 50,000?
Yeah. Less than 50, but more than 5.
Okay, because in 2004,
I would say between 500 and 5,000. That's just. Okay. I mean, I'm just picking those numbers out of the air. Yeah.
In 2004, in New York City for the Republican National Convention, 200,000 anti-Iraq war protesters showed up. The Republican convention went on without a hitch, and George W. Bush won re-election. And in fact, when it comes to conventions, they're now, unlike in 1968 in Chicago, they are now under federal enforcement control. The Secret Service is basically in charge of them in terms of who gets deployed and all that other kind of stuff.
And there are perimeters around all the venues. Like there's different levels of security that you have to go through. My husband's been to a couple conventions. It's not easy to get close to the venues, and it kind of depends on who's speaking, how close you can get. But like cab drivers complain. They're like, I can drop you off here, but it's too much of a pain in the ass to go through the roadblock. You're going to have to walk the next 6 blocks to your hotel.
So what I think is more likely to happen is you'll see a floor fight on the platform, say Monday or Tuesday, because conventions have floor fights about stuff like this. This is the kind of thing.
Yeah, but that'll only be broadcast on C-SPAN, so I'm the only one who will see it.
Well, yeah, no, hardly anyone is going to pay attention. Biden usually does a very good job with being off the cuff with people who interrupt his stuff. He has done it on the campaign trail fairly well. They will probably, by summer, I would suspect we may be under a ceasefire because they're talking about that again. There may be a Rafah operation where the administration may actually openly be in conflict with Netanyahu, which would sort of spin things differently. And as much as there are people riling up on campus and such, if you ask voters, even young voters, what their big important issues are, Israel-Gaza doesn't really bump into the top of the list. It stays near the bottom. Joe Biden has a lot of problems that he needs to work on, and I think he will work on them. This is one of them, but I don't see a 1968 situation for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them chiefly is Hubert Humphrey still won despite Chicago 1968. We tend to forget that. What? He nearly won the election.
What? He lost by about 500,000 votes, yeah.
He nearly won the election. It was not 1972. And in fact, if we knew then what we knew now, Humphreys probably would have won the election. Johnson knew that Nixon was screwing up the Vietnam peace negotiations, but he couldn't tell anybody because then he would have to admit that the National Security Agency was spying on Richard Nixon, which would have been a bigger controversy. So he had to sit on it, and Nixon was able to squeak through. But it was a very, very close election, and outside of the complete wackos and communists, and there were too many of them in 1968, most of the folks who were angry at Lyndon Johnson in the summer still voted for Hubert Humphrey in the fall because he went dovish in October and called for a bombing halt.
I had mentioned this earlier. I honestly think once school is out and the campuses are cleared, even some of the bigger campuses, we're not going to see the encampments. Kids go home for the summer. Even like, and the only people who are going to be left are going to be either professional, is going to be truly Antifa, or, they get jobs, they go do other things, and maybe they'll protest and encamp in the suburbs or, at their home, but it's not going to be the same. So I think we're going to see that also as a thing that will clear out this summer. So maybe in the fall again, but we're going to have 3 months of relative quietness.
Okay, I want to move on and ask, what about Trump and Israel? And why doesn't the media explore what the Trump doctrine would be on Israel if he wins re-election?
Denial. I think they're just, pretending like they might not ever have to deal with it. But Trump's prior doctrine on Israel, he was giving away intel on the Israelis to Putin, to the detriment of Israeli agents, we believe. Kushner's in bed with the Saudis. The only thing he ever did as president was, recognize Jerusalem as the site for our embassy instead of Tel Aviv, which is actually not convenient, as well as being out of step with politics. So he doesn't have a history. He doesn't have an articulated plan, and the media is just kind of willing to let him slide on this, which drives me bananas because they always let him slide. They give him the benefit of the doubt that he actually knows something when all evidence is to the contrary, and they need to stop it.
We've seen this again and again with Trump, whether it's, I have this healthcare plan and I'm going to show it to you, but not now. I have this infrastructure bill and it's going to be awesome, but I'm not going to show it now. And I've got this Middle East plan. Wait for it. I'm going to have Jared write it for me. And I'm going.
He read 25 books on it.
He read 25 books. And the Jared Kushner peace, a Middle East peace plan, literally was, hey, it's just not economically feasible, this whole war. It doesn't really make sense. So if we just wait another 10 years, we're going to throw some McDonald's in and everyone will come around. And real estate over there, that's a thing.
Yeah, no, so, he said that. He said that the beachfront property in Gaza could be very, very profitable.
We've said it before on this podcast. Trump Plaza Gaza. It has a ring.
I also think most of I haven't really seen a lot of the coverage. I read my news. I don't watch it. But a lot of the coverage has been sort of just to an extent, the straight news coverage. What is happening? How is the Biden administration reacting? In terms of what might happen in November, there's talk about, these things could hurt Biden. But in terms of this is what Biden says and this is what Trump says, you're right. Nobody is actually doing that because nobody is sort of in that campaign mode for some reason. The story among the Republicans is not what is Donald Trump's view on Israel. The story among the Republicans is, how ridiculous did Bill Barr look endorsing Trump? And why are so many other Republicans looking at it and going, yeah, I'm not doing that. Thank you very much.
DJ, if I may commit some news, Ron
Certainly.
DeSantis endorsed Trump.
He did that before the New Hampshire primary. It's just that nobody noticed.
Well, Trump was truthing about it today. So
of course, because he's Donald Trump and he does this kind of thing. But
he's on a gag order. He doesn't want to get found in contempt of court, so he can just talk about Ron DeSantis.
Yeah. Given the nature of this race, the political coverage of 2024 is all about the major party nominees' foibles. Joe Biden has policy foibles and concern about his age. Donald Trump has foibles and get in that a large chunk of his party clearly doesn't like him anymore, and he can't string a sentence together, which is actually getting more play now than it used to. They're not thinking about this kind of thing. Trump's Israel policy is not a horse race matter, and that's the problem. Everything in the campaign is about the horse race. And they're not talking about how they differ on this or that issue, because the assumption is it's all going to be a character election. Maybe it will.
And Trump isn't talking about it. He can't turn it into personal grievance, so he's not talking about it. He's just saying Joe Biden is wrong, and that doesn't make good news.
And he doesn't like Bibi either, because Bibi was the first leader to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory in 2020.
The other thing I wanted to ask you guys is about RFK Jr. on this issue. We talk about Biden, we talk about Trump. We haven't really talked about policy issues concerning RFK Jr. And I don't know whether you know this or not, but his campaign is on the ground at the universities where these protests are, gathering signatures to get on ballots in those states, which implies that he is pro-Hamas, although we would say anti-Israel, but he would say pro-Hamas. What do you think his actual stance would be, and how do you think this might affect his campaign?
I know his stance. He's talked about it. It's in the news. He's as rabidly pro-Bibi as Trump is. So maybe they should, read some of his statements at those damn things.
Hang on. Also, if he's gathering signatures to get on state ballots on college campuses, is he verifying residency, or is he just, collecting signatures and hoping it'll all come out in the wash?
Well, wherever you are, wherever you're gathering signatures, I don't care what they try to tell you. You gather as many as you can, and then afterwards you worry about which ones are going to be authenticated or not.
Yeah, he's right.
I'm just saying that he's making his job harder by not going to places where everyone who is there is a resident of the state.
Well, again, I want to come back to, there's two issues here. The one is getting on state ballots,
Right.
but the greater point I was trying to make is that sends a message to all of these protesters that Bobby Kennedy is your guy. Now, DJ's point is taken that his actual stance may be pro-Bibi Netanyahu, pro-Israel, but having people on the ground collecting signatures for him is going to start a ripple effect that, oh, maybe he's with us, maybe he's with us. That was my point.
It probably will create that ripple effect, but if you look at it even a little critically, you can see that he's on the grift.
If they looked at it a little critically, he wouldn't even be in this campaign. But did anybody see him on Bill Maher's show?
No, I can't watch that. I can't.
Guys, you've got to start watching this coverage. We're going to go through this campaign, and if we just go, well, I don't watch this, I don't like him, I don't think he has a chance, and you don't see the man speak, you're not going to see what the voters are seeing.
No, I will watch Kennedy. Sorry, I will watch Kennedy on a lot of things. I'll watch him on Fox, I'll watch him on MSNBC, but I won't watch him on Bill Maher because I think Bill Maher's opinions and views are horrible. And yes, he does get something right once in a while, but so does a blind squirrel. So.
He also reaches a lot of young liberals.
I think that's awesome, but doesn't mean he's right or good.
No, you're missing the point. But he's giving this guy a positive platform to speak to those people.
That's not what I've seen in the reports on it. The reports where he hit him pretty hard on the vaccine stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't that hard, DJ. I saw it. It wasn't that hard.
Yeah, and Bobby Kennedy can just go on to Joe Rogan and erase all of it.
Well, yeah, there's that too.
Speaking of people who give him a giant platform, let's face it, Rogan has a bigger platform than Maher.
Absolutely.
And neither of them are as funny as they think they are.
That's true. But this is why the Biden campaign is sitting on $150+ million. This is the kinds of things you use that money for. To get voters more engaged and to get them more informed. The polling has shown it over and over and over again. The more engaged and informed voters are, the better Biden does. So the solution is you get voters more informed and more engaged, and you use all of the money that is coming in to do that. I mean, when I talk about the optimism I think that Joe Biden can win this election, I don't mean he can just sit on his hands and do nothing and just coast to victory. There are things you do besides roll your helmet on the football field when you take the field. He has to do those things. But I think once he does those things, the only voters who will be left looking to vote for Robert Kennedy are folks who would have voted for Trump in a two-way race anyhow, while Biden can cobble the pro-democracy, pro-NATO coalition behind him and win the election. That's what I think will happen. That doesn't mean it's happening right now, because we're still 6.5 months out.
Good point. And I just want to, before we move on, I just want to point out to our listeners that DJ and I went into this issue, the RFK effect, in detail on our Substack page, The More Perfect Union on Substack. So if you want to see his take on it and then my take on it, which was a little Real Debate Without the Hate on paper, go to Substack and take a look for that. Okay?
It was a very good colloquy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to colloquy all over you. Okay, moving on to the Supreme Court, where they heard two major cases this week. The state of Idaho argued that their no exemptions abortion law should take precedence over federal law, ensuring stabilizing care for all emergency room patients. And of course, in the other big case this week, Donald Trump was in the courtroom of the Supreme Court seeking presidential immunity. He wants unlimited presidential immunity. Nobody thinks that that's going to happen. But there did look to be maybe 5 votes for limited presidential immunity. So let's start with the EMTALA case. I have a little trouble pronouncing that one, and the EMTALA case. And I'm going to throw to Rebecca because you probably are more informed on this, certainly, than I am, and maybe my other partners here.
EMTALA stands for the Emergency Medical Transfer and Labor Act, and it's a Reagan-era law that was basically a federal mandate to any state that or any hospital that takes Medicare has to stabilize any patient who comes into the emergency room. And the rationale behind the law is you can't deny care due to inability to pay or dump patients on other hospitals because they're Medicare patients and you only want to take private insurance patients. It was a completely fiscal rationale. And this has been on the books. Again, it's Reagan era. So we're talking decades. And it's been amended a few times to clarify how that applies in practice. And what it is not a law to do is to govern medical best practices. There's nothing in EMTALA that says you must offer A, B, C, or D treatment. The law says you must offer treatment that will stabilize the patient and doesn't put limits on that.
The other thing that these states and these laws are having that I don't think we talked about is that right now Idaho has lost 55% of its high-risk obstetricians. Right, and it's not the only state. OBGYNs are fleeing red states for fear of lawsuits, for fear of not being able to do their job, for fear of restrictions, and for fear of all sorts of things. And the ones who can leave do. They go to where they can help people the most. And
it's where they can afford the malpractice insurance. Because if you are in a state where you are potentially going to be facing state legal action, criminal legal action for providing standard of care, what is standard of care everywhere except your state, that's got to be extremely expensive. And I haven't seen studies to demonstrate this, but my guess is malpractice insurance is spiked in states like Idaho.
Well, it's not just providing, but not providing. If the hospital says you can't provide this, there could be a lawsuit later on also that they would have to. So, these doctors, their hands are tied. They should move. I mean, yeah.
They should move. And to be clear, the situations that we're talking about, and this has happened in Idaho, and they've airlifted women out of the state to go get care in states where the laws are not as ambiguous. We're not talking about situations where somebody strolled into an emergency room and said, hey, do you guys do abortions? It's not that. It is, people coming in grave medical distress. And these are situations that unfold rapidly. They progress quickly. And it's life or death decisions, or where there are 4 stages of it. We can save you and the baby. Great. Perfect. We can save you. We cannot save the baby, but we can save your uterus. Not great, but not the worst. We can save you. Your baby and your uterus are done for. Or we can't save any of you. And that arc goes very quickly in some cases. And I'm trying to write something on this, and it's hard. It's not coming together well. But all of us here, I'm guessing, could tell at least one story of a friend whose life was saved due to fast medical action when a pregnancy went sideways. And I'm talking about myself in this case. No, it's easy to laugh because when I tell it, it's a funny anecdote. Oh yeah, my son was face up. I pushed for 2 hours. He wasn't coming out. He was lying on a raft, just hanging out, didn't want to come out. But the fact is, I was actually at a point where I was in distress. He was in distress. And if I hadn't had a C-section, if that hadn't been available to me, then the outcome could have been quite tragic. Situations like that where there is not adequate medical intervention can result in both maternal and fetal death. And I tell this as a funny story because the kid I gave birth to is sitting upstairs. He's 6'2". He's going to be in jazz band next year. But I think we've all been a little cavalier about how close to the threshold of death most of us walk during pregnancy. And to not allow the medical professionals tasked with ushering us through that process, to not allow them to do what is best for us, is a grave injustice to anyone who wants to be a parent in this country.
Which is why fewer Americans want to be parents. This is one of the reasons why abortions have gone ups and stops. It's why I keep saying that the pro-life movement is literally scaring the life out of women, trans men, and non-binaries. This is what's happening. This is also the kind of thing that shifts voter perception, and that shifts perception about what is important to them. Now, Dobbs made this an important issue to voters in 2022, in 2023, and in 2024. But something like the Arizona law, which they still can't get off the books because the state Senate went for a holiday or something, or this Idaho, I heard the House voted to repeal it. I haven't heard anything from the state Senate. Maybe I'm wrong. But the Idaho law, these are all things that affect voters individually as well, where this moves this thing up higher as an issue. Harold Macmillan was once asked what the thing he feared the most as British Prime Minister in terms of politics, and his response was events, dear boy, events. Events like this are the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that can knock Gaza off the front page for a few hours or a few days, or something that just completely reshuffle the deck or scramble it for swing voters. Like, oh wait, this kind of thing happens if I sit on my hands.
Yeah, and the question becomes: do the conservative justices want to prevent emergency terminations of pregnancies more than they want to uphold the Constitution? And I have concerns that they do, particularly the men. Amy Coney Barrett, she struck a fairly realistic tone about saying, I can't believe you didn't think of all the contingency plans that you need to think of when it comes to pregnancy care. Probably because she's been through it and she knows that this is not actually a joke. But some of the guys are like, I don't know. What kind of complication could cause the loss of an organ but not cause the loss of a life? I'm like, a hysterectomy, you numpty. Where have you been?
Justice Barrett basically typifies a large section of what was the pro-life community. Folks who were blissfully unaware of just how rudimentary politicians' knowledge of anatomy was, and just how unconcerned they really were about real-life events. For years, the movement told us, oh, they've got this covered, they've got all these contingencies figured out. Guess what? They didn't, because they did not care.
The other case that came up this week, famously, was the Trump immunity case. And it looked to me, and it looked to a lot of experts on television, like there were at least 5, maybe more justices who seemed to think that there should be some kind of limited presidential immunity and maybe poised to send this back to the courts to decide that issue. I throw this open. I'll start with DJ. What's your take on this, and what do you see coming down the pike?
The optimist in me says that Chief Justice Roberts with Justice Barrett and the 3 Democratic appointees will come together with a decision that says, if a president commits an official act in furtherance of a crime, he can still be prosecuted. But an official act by itself that becomes a crime ex post facto or gets caught in the honest services fraud malaise and molasses, that is not something that can be prosecuted. That's the optimist in me. The pessimist in me says the Wacko 4 are going to want to go with, or the Wacko 5 are going to go with full bonkers. There are certain things that a president just has to do and blah, 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 blah. And it will be up to Roberts to sort of join them to keep them into something that is a bit more reasonable. I think it's going to be a complete mess. I think we could end up seeing every single justice write an opinion themselves. And I think this is going to be something that lower courts will have to work themselves out forever until a Trump actually wins an election and just ends this whole thing.
I think the like all conservatives, they are going to go back to their old standby, which is pornography.
I'm sorry. Are you trying to tell me Clarence Thomas is Mike Johnson's new accountability partner with the app and the phone and the porn? Okay.
They're going to say like I don't know when it's a crime, but when it is a crime, I know it when I see it.
Just I knew that's where you were going to go, and I think that that's right.
Yeah, I think they're going to say like political assassination. Well, that's a crime. Blockading a naval base, that's not a crime. So war crimes, immunity. Political assassination, sure. Sexual harassing a hairdresser from 20 years ago, that's not a crime. Stuff like that.
Okay, so my take on it is this. I do think that they're going to come down with a finding of limited immunity. So technically, Trump will have lost the case, and that may be the headline. But they're going to remand this, I think, back to the courts to decide some form of limited presidential immunity. And here's my question. How do they do that? How can any one court decide such a nuanced, sprawling set of issues that cover domestic policy, foreign affairs, wars and national defense, budgeting, federal prosecutions, national intelligence matters, emoluments, and a whole other host of thorny issues that aren't even before them? So you've got two lower courts who've already said, two of the lower courts who ruled on this before the Supreme Court already said they found no presidential immunity. So what does the Supreme Court do now? Send the case back to them and say, go find some?
I believe what the court does is sends back the charges in this case and says you need to delineate which of these charges could conceivably be an official act and which could be a private act. Unfortunately, Amy Coney Barrett got Trump's lawyer to clarify that for us a little bit. That was helpful, actually. And they are only going to rule on the questions in this case, which is not going to help anybody in the long term. And it's the main purpose of it is to slow down the DC case.
Are we kidding ourselves? Am I the only one here who believes Eileen Cannon already has the brief written about how everything is an official act and therefore immunity is completely unlimited?
Yeah, but Judge Chuck, this is going back to Judge Chutkan, not going back to Judge Cannon.
Well, it's going back to both, but yes.
And Judge Chutkan's competent. So,
yes, but Judge Cannon is not. And Judge Cannon can get it out there first because she probably has it written already.
Well, I don't see how she could rule that something that happened after the presidency was an official act. Now, she could rule that on some crazy, harebrained theory that he declassified this stuff before he left office, but that's a different issue. But you can't find that the stuff he did in 2021 and 2022 were official acts. He wasn't in office.
She will use everything Jimmy Carter did after 1981 to create a post-presidential official penumbra to cover everything that's in that case.
So I wanted to ask you guys, and I only wanted to ask it because it's written down here and I have to read it.
It's by law. There is no immunity for you.
I stay on script.
It is an official act to ask that question.
So what it says in front of me, folks, is what is public opinion really? How does the public form opinions in election years? And when do they do it? And on what basis? And Rebecca, I'm going to throw to you because this was your question that I had to ask. So I think you've got an answer.
Yeah, no, this is interesting. And, we there's a lot of talk. If you listen to political podcasts for any length of time, we end up having to confess, well, like we're giant nerds and we spend all of our time thinking about this because we don't have lives. But there are people out there who do have lives and they don't spend all of their time thinking about this. And so the question becomes, where are normal people getting their news? How much news are they getting? And, how is that influencing them? And so, I was going to ask you guys, how much time would you guess you spend reading or watching news each week? And what outlets are you watching? Kevin, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer it on a daily basis because I don't want to have to multiply things by 7. I'm not that smart. I would say I probably watch 6 hours of news on television a day. I also read newspapers online, New York Times, Washington Post. And you know what I've fallen in love with in the last year? The Drudge Report. It is one of the best, if not the best, news aggregator that I know of online. And also Drudge is very much anti-Trump, which makes me laugh. So, yes, I use that quite a bit.
I use a series of different things. And yeah, I watch TV. I watch everything from CNN to Fox to MSNBC. I do a lot of Twitter and Apple News, and there's a lot of online sites that I'm into. TikTok has become a new obsession for news. I think it's fascinating. There's everything from, what's her name? Politics Girl.
Oh yeah, love her.
Oh yeah, she's great.
She's fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
David Pepper has a whiteboard, and I used to work with David Pepper, which is a really
that's
bizarre.
cool.
Yeah,
Different from David Pecker, by the way.
and yes, he's made that joke all week long.
Well, you almost have to.
Yes, and for the record, David Pepper's awesome. And he was our county commissioner for a long time, and now he was the state Democratic rep for a long time. Awesome. I can only say good things about the guy.
What about you, DJ? Or you're not done, Greg? Are you still?
No, that's I mean, and then I hang out at the water cooler, and listen to the word on the street.
Yeah, man on the street. Yeah, I hear.
Yeah.
And DJ, what about you?
I don't really, like I said, I don't really watch news. I read it. Washington Post, The Atlantic, the Telegraph to get an idea of what's happening in London and how the rest of the world sees the country. Trying to think what else. The Bulwark obviously is one of my favorites. It just there's a nice warm fireplace for me. I'll usually look at Threads. On occasion, I'll look at Twitter if there's something breaking to get an idea of what's going on over there. My news environment is a bit more sheltered than it used to be, and I'm not really sure how to get myself around that. But as far as I'm concerned, there's no point in watching television for news when you can just read about it later. And usually it makes more sense if you read about it later than if you watch it in real time, at least for me.
All right. So you guys, you're fairly typical in as much as you do use online sources for news. 93% of adults in the U.S. rely on online sources for news, including over 80% who rely on social media for news, but they don't all trust it. They're scrolling whatever feed, but they're also looking at it with a little bit of a side eye. As for the amount of time American adults spend engaged with the news, Kevin, you said you spend 6 hours a day.
Yeah, about 3 to 4, maybe 6 hours a day. That might be conservative for all I know.
Your daily news consumption exceeds the weekly news consumption of most American adults. 6 hours a week.
So does my consumption of sugar.
And that is why you are so sweet-tempered. 6 hours a week is about what most Americans spend on the news. So we're talking about an hour a day, give or take, where they're scrolling through headlines, and they're doing it online. They're doing it on devices. And 70% of people, 76% of global consumers prefer online news because of the convenience. And I think because of what DJ said, that it's easier to bookmark something and go back and read it later when the full story has had a chance to develop. But, and here's the statistic that I found a little bit alarming. 44% of American adults say they are actively avoiding the news. And I can't draw this statistic out of my memory bank, but isn't that close to the number of American adults who don't vote?
It's close to the number who are going to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, but people, there are a lot of people who are hiding their heads in the sand. So we are talking about public opinion is based on people who are getting their news in small doses online when it's convenient for them, about an hour's worth a day, when they're not avoiding it completely. So, we talk about all of this stuff in granular detail because we are neurotic obsessives who have a little bit of a problem. And, our spouses are testament to that. But it's, we worry about protests. We worry about Supreme Court arguments and the nuance of it all. And are maybe we just worrying too much?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's a problem for me in my house. Jess is more emotionally balanced than I am. And she has already made the decision, and she tells me it nightly, that she has decided to step away from the news. Not that she doesn't listen to it at all, but she avoids indulging in it because she realizes that all it's going to do is make her upset and bitter. And that's not a way to live. And I want to be more like her in that regard.
I sometimes think about my online news consumption. I remember back years ago, it's been many years, but I used to smoke. And there would be times where I'd be smoking a cigarette. I'm like, why am I even doing this? I'm not enjoying it. I feel kind of icky. I just have the cigarette in my hand because it's a habit. And that's how I feel when I'm scrolling Twitter sometimes. And I'm reading these hot takes and headlines that are just making me more emotional. I'm like, is there really a point to what I'm doing? Would I be better off reading The Atlantic for an hour a day and walking away from it all?
There is one place where people can get all the news they need in 45 minutes or less, and that's the More Perfect Union podcast. And if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't heard of it, I suggest you check it out. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening. If you enjoy what we do here, please check us out. No, if you enjoy what we do here, please share our link on your Facebook and other social media timelines so your friends who indulge in only 6 hours of news a week can find us and make us one of those hours. Also, as I mentioned before, we have a Substack page where you can find us. It's called The More Perfect Union. What else would we call it? And you can find us on Instagram where we're revitalizing our page with some new photos and jokes that I write. And Rebecca is doing some funny things on Twitter about the Trump trial.
Not the Trump trial. I'm talking about his clothes because his clothes. He has repeated some outfits 2 and 3 times. The trial is 8 days long. So that tells you something.
You are the Coco Chanel of the Trump era.
I am the Anna Wintour of the Trump
Yeah, let's not say
he,
Coco Chanel. I mean,
I am not a Nazi.
Too many Nazi connections there.
Too many Nazi connections. But yeah, so I did a deep dive recently into the brand of suits Trump likes to wear. Their spokesmodel in 2020 was not Donald Trump. In fact, it was Brad Pitt. So go to our Instagram page to learn more about that.
I'm fascinated by that now. I just thought he bought off the rack. Like Sears.
Well, according to one of his books from 2004, he did buy off the rack because he said that you only need custom-made suits if you have a very strange body shape. By 2016, his campaign said he was getting custom-made suits, which I guess means that by 2016, he had a very strange body shape.
Or at least he acknowledged he had a very strange body shape.
Right. And then the makers of his suits, Brioni's the company that makes his suits, they confirmed that they do make suits to his specifications. He chooses the cut and the fabric. It's not us guys, it's him, is basically the content of their statements.
And with that, Greg Matusak, have you started working on the screenplay for the More Perfect Union movie?
Actually, Rebecca convinced me. I'm taking a step back. Next week, you guys are going to talk about stuff, and I'm going to say, who? Donald who? I've never heard of this guy. I am just completely not doing anything, so this movie's on hold. Everything's on hold. I am just going to be like, I've never heard of this. Lawyer what? So you got me to thank for next week's just terrible. I'm going to contribute nothing. I mean, less than what I do now, which is not much. So good luck, listeners.
Who says you don't tell jokes?
I'm just going to be even more of a pretty face.
I think you should bring your saxophone next week.
Oh.
Play us all out.